Hey, what's going on everybody? It's Torrance with Sword Guy Builds. The vampire killer from the third overview video was one of my favorites because I love finding inventive ways to reinterpret the whip designs from artists in other fields. So I'm doing that again for this overview for what I assume is going to be a pretty well-known whip in the gaming world, and that is Anne Takamaki's whip from Persona 5. So we can see from the artwork that it's a solid red bullwhip with maybe a 10-inch handle and a metal heel with a little ring on it. The little bands on the thong sort of imply to me that the entire whip is supposed to be metal, really. But we have to kind of understand that sometimes people who draw whips do not know how they're made or what materials are used, so I'm just going to ignore that element. The specific way the taper of this whip swoops down off the handle means I'll need to slightly adjust the construction of the core. Normally for the Tachi model, I have a 2-layer core, the first belly, a bolster, then the second belly. But for this one, I'll be taking a page out of David Morgan's book with this little extra bolster. This isn't technically how he did it, but it should still give me the shape I'm looking for. The 2 other core parts are applied on top of that. Now that I see how the size of the adjusted core looks, I can work on the belly components. Everything is stretched, tapered, and beveled, and then before I start braiding, I go back and clean up the taper of the core parts. I think I've mentioned this before, but it's necessary to braid extra tightly at the end of the handle to ensure there's support in the thickest part of the whip. If it's not done tightly enough, or if the strands don't bite onto the end of the handle enough, the thong may flop over after a while. We can see after the first belly is braided that I am starting to get the specific swooping taper that I'm looking for. For bellies, I feel comfortable sizing the strands by eye, but for overlays, I call on this formula from Bernie's work. He liked to take his core diameter times 4.5 and divide by the number of strands to figure out the sizing. But I think he split his strands down much thinner than I do, so I multiply the core diameter by 5 to make sure I achieve the coverage I want. And as an experiment, I actually also worked that formula backward to figure out how quickly to taper the strands to their final diameter of about 3 millimeters. I do take a moment to split these strands just a little bit. I feel this helps the braiding feel as smooth as possible toward the end of the thong. Before I braid the overlay, I take a moment to mark the patterning changes on the handle. Patterning composition is important because the eye can pick up on even little imbalances, which I've definitely learned the hard way. Once all the braiding is done, I tie on the fall. Each remaining strand from the overlay is tied in a quick half hitch around both the thong and the fall to make a stable junction and then trimmed to a low profile. This needs to be done tightly and consistently to avoid premature wear. The whip is then rolled to smooth the braiding and even out the tension. Really, this is done for the bellies too. It's just not one of the more interesting steps, so I don't show much of it. Now I need to figure out a good way of attaching the metal ring to the heel of the whip. I decide to use an idea I first tried on the vampire killer, which is to make a little strap from a kangaroo trimming and fold it around the rest of the heel foundation. This is then nailed together and I can start working on the knot. So my original idea was to do something I've seen Peter Jack do, which is to interweave metal wire through the knot. I thought that would be a great touch and tie the look together, but the silver wire I bought was too stiff to use. So I scrapped that plan entirely and decided to just use stainless steel wire. I was hoping to find something thin and solid, but all I could find on short notice was twisted cable. I tried tying the cable into the knot, but it was still too stiff to lay down right. So I thought maybe if it was flat instead of round, it would be easier to work with. And since I can be a total sucker for subtle details nobody cares about, I was like, oh dude, well what if I flat braided the individual wires of the cable and used that? So I spent several days untwisting the cable and painstakingly flat braiding the 7 wires in a simple weave. Because the wires wouldn't hang straight and kept tangling, I ended up having to weigh them all down with a bunch of steel nails and clamps. That allowed me to get into a good rhythm and slowly chip away at the braid. And this was by far the slowest braiding I've ever done. But by the time it was finished and cleaned up, it actually did look super nice. I learned trying to use the twisted cable that it doesn't like going around tight corners, and I actually designed a special interweave to make the bites as long as possible. Anyway, to my extreme disappointment, it didn't work out that way either. That knot was the worst looking mess I've ever been openly responsible for as a professional. Absolute irreconcilable garbage. So after all this, I ended up just finding this leather paint. I painted a long strand of black kangaroo silver and just tied a normal knot. Despite all the heartache, the finished whip is totally awesome. It has a really interesting balance and super smooth braiding. I also think I nailed the specific dramatic taper in the artwork too, and that's very satisfying to me. Not to mention the fact that this is definitely a one-of-a-kind whip that'll make somebody out there super happy. Thank you all very much, as always, for watching. Please like and follow to see more content like this. Swing by swordguybuilds.com to see all the available whips. Stay safe, and I will talk to you very soon. Bye.